Went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed. "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will but yours be done." When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial." While he was still speaking, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man?" When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, "Lord, should we strike with the sword?" Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this," and he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple police, and the elders who had come for him, "You come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit. When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, someone else, on seeing him, said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then about an hour later, still another kept insisting, "Surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." At that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus began to mock him and beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" They kept heaping many other insults on him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, gathered together, and they brought him to their council. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." He replied, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." All of them asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." Then the assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man perverting our nation, forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king." Then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered, "You say so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no basis for an accusation against this man." But they were insistent and said, "He stirs up the people by teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he began even to this place." When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him off to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had been wanting to see him for a long time, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some sign. He questioned him at some length, but Jesus gave no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. Even Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then he put an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. That same day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other, Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was perverting the people, and here I have examined him in your presence, and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him." Then they all shouted out together, "Away with this fellow! Release Barabbas for us." This was a man who had been put in prison for an insurrection that had taken place in the city and for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify, crucify him." A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him." But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison. He released the man they asked for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. The good news of Jesus Christ.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Sharon was pushing her twins in one of those double-decker strollers when an older couple stopped her to admire the toddlers. "And who is this?" exclaimed the grandmotherly woman. "Oh," replied Sharon, "this is Samuel the doctor and Sarah the attorney." It's hard not to project into our children who we hope they will become. Our hope and dreams, sometimes features of our own unlived lives, get projected, that is, put into our children. Both my parents had unlived dreams of being professional musicians. My mother won a major national vocal contest on the radio. My father, able to play piano and tenor sax by ear, always wanted to make a living by playing in Stan Kenton's big band. But Mom was a housewife and then an administrative assistant, and Dad a teacher and principal. And so my sister and I had music lessons galore. Me, piano and trumpet, my sister, piano and flute, and she's made a living in Europe now for 40 years playing professionally. So this morning we baptized Brooks Glenn, grandson of Glenn and Donna, son of Todd and Ellie, a third-generation Davis, and as of this morning, a new little member of CLC. Todd and Ellie, who do you advantage Brooks might become? This is Brooks, the doctor, the attorney, the teacher, the general contractor, the next Steeler wide receiver, the pirate Eric. And I wonder about Mary, the mother of Jesus. What is she thinking as Jesus is being hailed as some kind of hero king, as they spread palm branches in front of him? Does her heart swell in pride and love? Is she amazed that the child she carried inside of her is now being seen as someone who will defeat the Romans and reestablish the rule by the Jews over themselves? Does she experience him as a man wise beyond his years, or does she think he has gotten a little too big for his britches, that he might do better going into the carpentry business? It's hard to know. Three mothers are sitting around talking about how much their sons love them. Susan says, "You know that Warhol painting in my living room? My son Arnold bought that for me for my 75th birthday. What a good boy he is. He loves his mother." Molly replies, "You call that love? You see that Mercedes out in the driveway? That's from my son Bernie. What a doll." Shirley says, "That's nothing. You know my son Stan? He's in therapy 5 days a week with a psychotherapist, 5 sessions a week, and all he does is talk about me." For good or ill, we project into our children. We project onto one another. We project onto God who we think God is or should be. My family drove a bit out of the way to go to church. We drove from the east side of Columbus, Ohio, to the edge of downtown Columbus. And we would go by Capital University and the Lutheran Seminary, and we were stopped one Sunday at that red light. I was in the back seat reading, as I usually did, and my mother turned and said, "Scott, you have everything it takes to be a Lutheran pastor." She turned back around, the light turned green, we made a left turn. Nothing else was said by my mother and father, and I was like an oracle. Grabbed hold of my mother and spoke through her. The good news is that she knew I was going to seminary before she died. The bad news was she never saw me ordained. And so here's little Brooks, his whole life in front of him. In his baptism, we hand him over to God, who is aware of his hoped-for destiny. All that was within him, innate talents, a unique personality, what some call a nuclear program waiting to unfold as he grows up. Todd and Ellie, I hope it relieves some of the pressure of being parents to know that most developmental psychologists believe that about 80 to 85% of Brooks is a given. You can't mess it up. You're responsible for about 10%. And then grandparents and friends and the church and teachers responsible for the other 5. Isn't this why the ancient mind in its intuitive brilliance established a sacramental initiation rite that pronounces Brooks as first and foremost a child of God? That ultimately God's will is primary. That it is God's intention to see Brooks grow up into the man God wants him to be. Just as my parents projected their hopes and dreams into me, just as Todd and Ellie, Glenn and Donna and all of the family project their hopes and dreams into Brooks, we project our hopes and dreams into Jesus as Son of God. In the day, the governor was Pontius Pilate. The Roman governor did not live in Jerusalem, but he came to Jerusalem during the Passover. He was not there to join in the celebration, but to make sure there would not be trouble. Because Passover was a time when the Jews celebrated their deliverance from foreign powers in the past. And the Romans certainly did not want the people getting ideas about overthrowing Roman rule. Pilate would come down to Jerusalem in a display of Roman power and superiority. He entered Jerusalem from the west with cavalry and soldiers, a massive display of martial supremacy, with golden eagles mounted on poles, sun glinting on armor and weapons, a lavish reminder of who was in charge. And at the head of the procession, Pilate, the Roman governor, coming in the name of the emperor who expected the people to worship him as God. And then from the other end of the city, from the east, in that particular year, coming down from the Mount of Olives, came another man riding into Jerusalem, like Pilate, but not on a horse accompanied by cavalry, but on a donkey. A humble man, no pretension, no display of power. yet hailed as a king by those who spread palm branches before him. But why? Why? Well, they projected their hopes and dreams into Jesus. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. They desperately hoped that Jesus would be a king from on high, gathering the zealots and the rebels and the disenfranchised and the poor, and lead the army into battle against the emperor. Once again, the Jews would be free, and Jesus would usher in the kingdom of God. Now, the people's hopes and dreams were in opposition to their own scriptures, which clearly declared who God is, was, and will be. A God of tenderness and compassion, slow to anger, rich in kindness, and abounding in steadfast love. Not a God of power. Not a God who angrily destroys his enemies. This God is not like an earthly ruler who calls all the shots. So later in the week that we call Holy, when the people discover that their projections onto Jesus are illusory, in their acute displeasure, they are driven to the point where the cheers become jeers and they call for his death. As Isaiah said, he had no form of majesty that we should look at him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is before his shearers silent, so he did not open his mouth. It is truly a spiritual discipline to let go of our projected hopes and dreams when they are shattered, as they always are. As when our children go their own way over our protestations, our best advice, and our guidance. This is why we baptize not using the last name of the child. We will baptize Brooks Glenn, because child of God is now his last name. And when we baptize, we are being asked to consent that God knows best, and we know very little. All of life really asks us to let go of our narrow demands of how we think it ought to be, how we think it should go, and what we want it to be. And if we can, to do it with grace and understanding so that we more clearly see life and reality that are so much bigger than we are. So that we know this God who promises Brooks Glenn to be for him a God of tenderness and compassion, slow to anger, rich in kindness, and abounding in faithfulness. Amen.